So in the previous two lectures, we've spoken about kind of organizing or allocating our slots over our sessions, microcycle organization, and I'll give you an example on the sheet. So now what we should have in place is our slots distributed to allow kind of maximum performance over the week, and we've gone kind of goal of the block or client's most important slots first, then we've gone the most demanding, typically lower body, and then we filled in the rest to make sure we've not got too much pushing on one day, too much pulling, and we can keep that density with non-competing paired sets, etc. So you've had a couple of goes at it yourself now with the exercises. Hopefully this is going to help you drill down even more when we look at these kind of next lot of case studies. What are the best potentially exercise pairings to have, and then if you're going to pair exercises together, what are some of the considerations, and so we can choose the best exercises. But we're also going to go beyond the consideration about the best exercise physiologically, because there are other considerations that actually may even trump what is the most effective exercise. So we're going to look at the 3 E's of exercise selection. So you'll have seen this hopefully in the theoretical foundations, but maybe you're looking at it now with new eyes because you're seeing it for the second time, having done some of this kind of non-competing paired sets together. But we said when we're pairing 2 exercises, we've kind of got a hierarchy of principles that we don't want to violate, or we want to try and keep separate as much as possible. So we want to make sure that the target muscle is the limiting factor within the exercise and not some secondary reason or bracing or grip, whatever it might be. So we said, first of all, when we're pairing 2 exercises, do the primary muscles compete? Is it 2 lower body exercises that really do have both glutes in, or both quads or hamstrings, whatever it might be? Or is it 2 pushing exercises or 2 pulling exercises? That's not going to typically allow us to maximize performance, and so we probably want to stay away from that. Then we're looking at the supporting musculature, we're looking at the grip, and then we're looking at bracing, and they can be in any order we want really. So of course, when we're looking at our primary ones, it's fairly easy to say, okay, upper, lower, or push, pull, but we're going to look at a little bit more of the nuances behind that. Then we can look at things like the supporting structure. So an example I often give here is that goblet squat. If I hold the kettlebell here, my shoulders are still working. So even though it's a lower body or a knee dominant movement, if I paired that with like a horizontal push, like a dumbbell bench press or a press up, that might not work too well because they're both competing. Then we have grip. So, if I've got a vertical pull with a hip hinge or something like that, of course, they're both going to be very grip dominant. So can I add grip support if I need to? That's one of the modifications I could make, or potentially go with a supine hinge, so glute bridge or hip thrust. And then lastly, just bracing altogether. So like a bent over row in a squat. In the squat, you're having to brace hard, especially with like an anterior load. And then you're going to a bent over row, like a Penley row or bent over row, as I said. And the lower back's having to work hard, so you're having to brace hard the whole time. Glutes and hamstrings are holding isometric, so then also the supporting musculature is kind of not, it's violating our principles. So it wouldn't necessarily be a good option. So there we're going to potentially add some support. But what I've done is I've tried to give you somewhat of a cheat sheet for what movement patterns may be complementary for each other, and then some of the modifications that you may have to choose. So going from the top left, you can see the different pairings of the movement patterns that we could have. Then we have do the primary muscles compete? Is the supporting musculature competing? Are you constantly having to brace? And then is grip competing? And then modifications. And what we've got is somewhat of a traffic light system. So if 2 exercises are very compatible within that certain category, they'll be green. If there is a modification required, it's amber, and you'll see the modification we may want to think about on the right-hand column. And then red indicates that these might not be good paired sets or supersets to use together because they're going to have lots of overlap. So we can see if we're going to have 2 lower body exercises together, there's a very good chance, unless it's something like an isolation exercise, a leg extension and leg curl. If it's like a squat and a deadlift, we're going to have primary muscles competing, the supporting musculature competing. We're going to be bracing pretty much throughout the entire superset. And then depending on where we load that squatting pattern, that knee dominant movement, there's also going to be a modification required for grip. So they just don't work too well. Now, when we can compare that to like a push and a pull, so an antagonistic paired set, then we can see that actually they kind of tick all the boxes in terms of green light. So they're great options. But then as we start to move down, we can see some patterns. So for example, the knee dominant movements with horizontal and vertical push and pull, there may be some modifications required. So if we look at the knee dominant movement and the vertical pull, they're pretty much going to be great options to go together unless I'm using something like a potato sack squat or a trap bar squat, where then grip does become dominant for both exercises. And so I'm going to have to add in some grip support there. But that's my only real modification that's required. Whereas other pairings, such as knee dominant and horizontal push, I may have to also consider that loading position, like we spoke about with the goblet squat, as well as the ability to brace. So, if I was holding a press up, for example, after doing a goblet squat, not only are my shoulders going to be fatigued, but I'm having to brace the whole time. So I'm going to want to make some modifications there. Now, I will say it's very hard for me to obviously get every exercise that could fit within a certain movement and write down all the modifications. But this should give you a pretty good idea on some modifications that may be appropriate when pairing your exercises together. So download it, memorize it, use it when trying to put your complementary pairs together. Now, it's not just about the physical. So when we're writing our personal training sessions, as we'll see when we get to our 3 E's, it's not only about choosing the most quote unquote effective exercise, but it's also choosing a pragmatic exercise. So we can have the most effective exercise in the gym, and I'm just pulling one out of thin air here. Let's say that it's the chin up. However, there's only one place in the whole gym that's got a chin up bar, and we're either going to have to wait for it, or we can't get on it, or it's just not in the same floor as where we're doing our exercises now. Then it won't be very pragmatic to do that. We might have to choose a different option, like a cable pull, for example, that will allow us to do that exercise. So we're always trying to figure out if my exercise is both effective and pragmatic. And we'll talk about this a lot more in weeks 4 of phase 1, but it's something to start considering now. So when I'm considering my effective pragmatic, I'm saying, yes, okay, what is the best exercise? But then can I actually implement that exercise in the location I want to do it, using the equipment that I want? So for example, sometimes people might have a vertical press, so like a military press with a squat, and they might a back squat, and they might be exercises that pair well, but then maybe you need 2 barbells, or maybe people want to do squat and bench press. So now you need 2 barbells and a bench and all the plates, and it doesn't really become, it's not very practical to do so. The time of day. So there might be times when you can absolutely guarantee you and your clients can get on the squat rack, but other times 6 p.m. in a pure gym where you might not even get a look at a squat rack. And so it wouldn't be very effective exercise to program in back squats there if you know you can't get on them. And so you're going to choose a slightly different option. Maybe it's going to be a landmine potato sack squat, a double kettlebell front squat, or cable squat, or something along those lines. That's going to be effective, but also pragmatic. That also applies to your business model and your client, because again, what you could do with a one-to-one client, you may not be able to do in a 6-to-1 semi-private setting. So effective, pragmatic. So not only are we thinking about the physical and how they compete with each other, so as we said before, in terms of primary muscles, supporting musculature, bracing and grip, but we're also thinking, do they pair together pragmatically in the environment, in the equipment that I've got, in the time that I want to train people? An easy way to start to get around this or think of this is mobile stable. So if I have a stable piece of kit, such as a squat rack, I'm probably thinking about my second exercise being something that can be mobile. What I don't want to be is a lat pull down, which is on, maybe even if it's close, it's in a fixed position I have to walk over to. Somebody could use that kit, somebody could take it. What really I want is an exercise that I can do right outside of that rack. Or if I really want to do the pull down, an exercise that I can do next to, a mobile exercise that I can do next to that lat pull down. So now we're doing lat pull down with a heel elevated doubled kettlebell front squat, as opposed to being in the rack. So when you're putting your 2 exercises together, if you've got 2 mobile exercises, brilliant. What we really don't want to see is 2 stable exercises, because then that really starts to limit us. And the more efficient you can be with your pragmatic selections, the more time you're going to save in setup, the more time you're going to save moving your clients, and obviously the more sets we can do, the better a training effect we can get. So we've spoken about the physical a little bit. We've spoken about this idea of being efficient or effective. This brings us on to this idea of the 3 E's of exercise selection, as I like to think of it. And to have all 3 of them is going to be where we want to be in terms of a sweet spot for exercise selection. So the first thing we're asking is it effective? How much stimulus can we place on the target muscle per repetition? So we know that some exercises are going to be, this doesn't mean that everybody has to back squat, right? Because a back squat might be less effective for an individual than somebody else, but it has to be something that we can load pretty well and challenge the target muscle, and it doesn't require a load of sets to get the work done. Next, we're thinking about, is it efficient? So this goes back to this pragmatic idea. So I'm not having to sit around and wait for it. It's not taking me 15 minutes to set it up perfectly. It's not something that is a piece of equipment that I can never get on, or I'm having to shuttle across the gym and waste 2 minutes to get to. So here we're thinking about how much stimulus can I apply per unit of time, because the more stimulus I can apply in a unit of time, the more dense my session, the more efficient my session, the more time it gives me to do other exercises or other movements. And the last one we haven't spoken about yet is it enjoyable? Now, there's going to be exercises that people dislike, but we know they're important towards the goal. So that's why we have their client buy-in. So I'm not saying here that your clients have to love all your exercises. There's a good chance they won't, but they have to at least buy into why they're doing them and appreciate how it drives them towards their goal. There's nothing worse than doing an exercise that you hate, that you don't feel is relevant to your program, that you're just going to switch off from. So we're looking for effective exercises that we can allow us to apply a large amount of stimulus per repetition whilst not violating our complementary or antagonistic paired set principles that we spoke about before. We're looking for pragmatic or efficient exercises that are quick to set up, that are set up within the space and the equipment and time that we have. And they're also exercises that for the majority our client buys into, enjoys and wants to progress on to help them move towards their goal. Because if we have effective exercises that are efficient but the client doesn't buy into, they're going to probably feel like their autonomy has been thwarted and that their exercises are very mentally taxing, dreading the exercise sessions, not looking forward to turning up to them. If we've got really effective exercises and they're really enjoyable, but you have to sit around 10 minutes to get on them, or they take a really long time to set up, or they take a long time to get between, or whatever it might be, then they're time consuming, and that means they're not very efficient, right? And which we know when a time limited personal training session, we need efficient exercise choice. And then lastly, if we've got efficient exercises that are quick to set up, but they're not very effective, even if your client enjoys them, then we've got ineffective training, right? We're basically just keeping somebody entertained for an hour as opposed to moving them towards a stimulus. And that's not to say, we'll talk about being a showman, etc. in phase 2 and how we sell our programs to our clients. But ineffective training is where we want to stay away from. But when we've got all three of these, when an exercise is effective with all the physical things we spoke about before, when it's efficient, so it's pragmatic and can be set up in the time, space, equipment, business model that you've got, but also is bought into by the client, that is a big tick when choosing exercises. So if we zoom into our kind of 3E area now, these are some of the things that we're thinking about. So in terms of when I'm selecting exercises for a client, I can dive into all the nerdy stuff with biomechanics, exercise mechanics, where you learn from RTS, resistance training specialist, Michael Goulden, Integra, James and Paul over at the, I think it's the PT project now. Some amazing things where we're looking at line of force, anatomy, strength profiles, resistance profiles, and how we manipulate the movement and the position and the guidance, resistance, restraint, support, all these kind of things. But really, does it match the client's skill, mobility and tolerance? So we want to choose an exercise that they can perform pretty well, that we can load pretty heavy, it doesn't push them into a range of motion that they can't control and may injure them. In terms of efficiency, as we said, we're thinking about equipment we have available to us and how long it takes us to get set up. Can we set it up on the time of day that we want to train somebody within the business model and the client's abilities? There's nothing less efficient than having a great exercise that's not right for the right client and they just don't get any stimulus from it. And then when it comes to if they enjoy it, we're looking at obviously what their goal is, because they may really dislike hip thrust, for example, but we know that they could potentially be an important goal for them, important exercise for their goal, therefore they may want to be included. Preference, this is really big. Towards the end of each training block, do a bit of course correction with your clients, ask them, what exercises do they enjoy, which ones do they want to see less of. And of course, we want to try and stick towards if you can find 2 exercises, one that it's efficient and effective, but the client doesn't buy into, then we've got a second exercise which is equally as efficient and equally as effective, but the client really loves. Of course, you're going to go for that. And I'd probably even go for that even if it was slightly less effective than the other exercise, because long term, that's going to win out. And here we're asking ourselves, is our client outcome focused or adaptation focused? And this is one of my light bulb moments in the last 5 years or so. So somebody who's outcome focused, we can think here, they just want to get the best training results possible, and the training experience is of little interest or value to them. So here we can think of somebody like a bodybuilder or a bride or groom to be. It's people who have got a very definitive goal in a certain amount of time, and they'll do whatever it takes to get the best results. You can put them through hell and back, and actually it doesn't really matter if they enjoy it, because it'll all be worth it for the end result. However, many of our clients are those individuals who want to enjoy the training process. We are pilots without a destination, taking them on a journey, and so they want to enjoy that journey, right? They want to enjoy that experience, and so to do that, they are more experience focused, I should say here. And so we have to help them enjoy the exercise. So if we're just filling it with really effective and efficient exercises they hate, there's a good job they're not going to buy into it. So when it comes to exercise selection, the first thing we think about is making it effective. Go through those complementary paired sets, go through the checklist for primary muscles, secondary muscles, bracing and grip. Make the modifications that are required. Does it allow us to load the client within their range of motion, their skill and their tolerance? If it does, we've got a very effective exercise. But from there, we have to ask ourselves, is it pragmatic? Can we set it up in an efficient time with the equipment and space that we have, in the business model we have and within the client abilities? And then lastly, client preference, client goal. Are they adaptation focused or are they experience focused? So that is our 3 E's of exercise.